Hey my friend, this is Duc. In this video, let's talk about how we can create the amazing zooming image effect in iOS with Swift, with Xcode, with all that cool stuff. The app looks like this, the final app looks like this. We have a collection view of a grid of images, of photos. When we click into one, we show the detail screen, a full screen image. And this full screen image doesn't use just like the slide in effect of the UI Navigation Controller, but rather we'll zoom out the image. We see this effect in a very popular app. One of that is the Photos app built-in in your iOS app. Another is Facebook. Another is Twitter. We use that all the time. It's become so intuitive. It becomes so natural to users because an image is that small. And when we want to see the big image, and if we zoom it out like that, it is so beautiful. It's so cool to use. It's so professional in your app. So download the starter project right below this video. I have a starter project for you, a bunch of code, a bunch of collection view, those kind of stuff already built in for you, already prepared for you, so that we can focus on just that effect in this video. And also, I'm going to send you, because you're going to enter your name and email on that page, I'm going to send you my upcoming new video series of 3 awesome training videos that I will teach you how to build Twitter with Firebase. We're going to show you how to build Instagram user interface with Xcode and Swift, how to build the Nike retail e-commerce store, all of those cool stuff, all free for you. So go download that thing and I'll see you in the demo. Alright my friends, so this is the complete project that we are going to develop together. So number one, please download your starter project right below this video. I prepared for you a starter project, has all the resources and some of the code that is already written for you so that we don't have to set up our collection view and those stuff again. Now, number two, when you go into the link below, you'll see this page. There you submit your name and email so that I send you the complete project and the starter project and a very interesting video training series that I think that you really enjoy that. So please download the starter project and let's get started. So this is the app that we want to build, right? So let me show you the complete project right here. And let's say I want to click into this image. It zooms out very nicely and smoothly like that. And yes, you can change the duration of your animation too. So let's break it down into different stages of the animation. Number one, we have the original image like this, and then it zooms out like that, right? It zooms out, and notice step number three. Step number three, we also have the background. The background original collection view is shrink down a little bit, right? It shrink down a little bit, and then it takes the whole screen and we show the detail screen. Right, so if you see this thing, if you notice the background view, it shrinks down very tiny, like it's around 0.8 to the scale of the original size. Okay, so let's get into work. Wait. Number one, download start project. Number two, let's create our zoom transitioning delegate object. This is the object that is going to override our original transition default transition of the UI Navigation Controller. So I will go over my Xcode right here, and then let's run the project first, and then we will inside our views like this. Okay, I will create a new file. Let's create a new file like that, and then it is going to be a Swift file. And I will name this guy. Let's name this guy Zoom. Okay, I will name this guy Zoom Transitioning Delegate, like this. And then we create the file. Now this is the start project. You see that when we click to this, it just used the very default animation transition of Navigation Controller, because inside our main storyboard right here, we have a Navigation Controller, and that's it. So it has the default transition of the Navigation Controller. We want it to be the zooming effect. So here, because we are going to use UIKit, so let's import UIKit here. Number one, let's create a class called Zoom Transitioning delegate because it is going to be a delegate object of the UI navigation controller, and I will show you how to do that. And it has to be an NS object subclass. Okay, I will tell you why it is the case. Now inside this thing, let's create some property for our object. So we have the transition duration. Let's have that like 0.5 seconds. If it is too long, then the user will be frustrated. If it is too fast, then it will be very like dizzy. It doesn't work. So you have to test this thing out. Okay, so you have to test this thing out depending on your design of the app. And then I also have let's say 3 other properties. Number 1 is the operation of the transition. Here, this is typed UINavigationController operation, and let's have that default to be none. Now this thing has 3 cases. Number 1 is none, number 2 is pop, and number 3 is push. So you know what that is the operation? The operation of the navigation controller, right? You push new view controller onto the navigation stack, or you pop out the navigation controller. And then let's have 2 other properties. Number 1, we have the private let of the zoom scale, meaning that how much do you want to zoom this image to? So I want just to set it to be like a CG float of something like 15. Because we know that it will not be as much, but we'll just set that to be 15. And then you notice the background view. The background, it also shrink down, right? Also shrink down. So let's have that let background scale. It would be a CG float of 0. Let's say 8 or 7. Okay, so it is more noticeable. Sounds good? All right. Next up, I'm going to create 2 other things that is going to help us for our transition. Number 1, we have a transition state enum. So let's have the transition state. This is an enum. It has 2 cases. Number 1 is initial, and case number 2 is final. That's it. So we just have that. So we know later on we will set the initial state and the final state, because if you know about animation in iOS, it's all about you set the initial state of the animation, and then you set the final state of the animation of the view you want to animate, and you let the iOS animation UIView.animate method do its magic, right? Next up, let's have another protocol. We are going to declare a protocol that is going to allow us to make sure that any view controllers that is going to use this transition delegate, it has to make sure that it have to implement this protocol. So this is a protocol called zooming view controller, and it has 2 methods. Number 1 is we want to make sure that this return for us a zooming image view for the transition of our zoom transition view controller delegate. It returns for us an UI image view like this. Okay, now again, this protocol is going to be conformed by any view controller that is going to use this zoom transitioning delegate. And because we need the image view to animate that thing, then we need to make sure that that view controller provides us the zooming view image. Right. So these 2 classes right here, you see the photos collection view controller and the detail view controller. Those 2 classes are going to conform to this protocol. Make sense? So that we can make sure that it returns for us this image view. Okay, I know that a lot of maybe you are not familiar with protocol in Swift, so it can be a tweak here, and in just a minute we'll see exactly how it works. And number 2, now, maybe in your app, in this app, I'm going to just animate one single image, this image. But maybe in your app, you want to animate a lot of other things. So I want to show you, let's write another method here, so just to make sure that you know that you can animate a lot of stuff, not just this image view. Okay, so let's say I want to have a background, so zooming background view for the transition of zoom transitioning delegate, it returns for us just a UI view, just a generic one. Again, this method here, we will not use that, but in your project, in the app that you're going to build using this effect, if you want to animate other things, you're going to add new methods here that gives you the views or any controls that you want to animate. Make sense? Okay. Now, because we want to make sure that later on, in the next step, we can check if those view controllers is indeed conforming to this protocol. Then we have to mark this protocol as an Objective-C protocol, because that's the only way that allows us to check if a class is conforming to another protocol. Okay? Alright, now, next step is to implement a protocol for our zoom transitioning delegate. It's called UINavigationControllerDelegate. Okay, so this UINavigationControllerDelegate protocol allows us to override the default transition effect. Make sense? Okay, now, just as a habit, I want to, or a convention, I want, whenever I implement another protocol, conform another protocol for a class, I create an extension. And this extension, let's call that of the zoom transition delegate. It conforms to UI navigation controller navigation controller delegate, so like this thing, right? Inside here, we're going to implement one single method that is called navigation controller. Let's say animate controller with navigation controller animate controller, like this. Okay, this method is really mouthful, so look for it. Navigation controller, animation controller for operation, from view controller to view controller. Okay. Now here, I have to tell you that there are two other things, right? So the from view controller is the initial view controller that takes you from the initial state to the final state. So number one, oops, my gosh. Okay, so number one, if we are transitioning from the master screen, which is the collection view, to detail screen, then the number one is going to be our from view controller. Number four is going to be our to view controller, right? But now when we animate it back from the number four to number one, then number four is going to be the from view controller, and number one is going to be the to view controller. Make sense? So that explains this to view VC and the from VC here. Here, I'm going to check if the from VC is conforming to our zooming view controller protocol, and the to VC is also conforming to the zooming view controller. Then when it conforms to that protocol, it must give us the views that we want to animate. Then we will make sure that the operation is the operation, right? We set the operation, it is popping or is it pushing, which is this thing, and it is the operation over here. And then we also make sure that we returned ourselves as the UI navigation controller, as the animated, the transition delegate. Make sense? So this method right here is the method of the UI navigation controller delegate. It returns a UI view controller animated transitioning, which we have to implement in just a minute. And we want to make sure that we tell the navigation controller, hey, I know that you has a default transition object, but now I want to override that default transition object by returning ourselves as the transition object. Make sense? Otherwise, if we do not have this from VC and the to VC to be our zooming view controller, then we just return nil so that the default transition will take place, will kicks in. Okay. Now you will see that maybe it will have an error. I don't believe so. Yeah, we have an error over here. It says self is not UI view controller animated transitioning, which is this guy, because it is a protocol that we have to implement next. So number one, we create the transition object, we implement the UINavigationControllerDelegate, and then let's implement the UIViewController animated transitioning. So let's have that extension for the zoom transitioning delegate. We implement the UIViewController animated transitioning. Now this thing is kind of like a default way that you implement any transition in iOS since iOS 7. So I hope that you enjoy this, and it sets the frame for you whenever you want to animate any other transition from one view controller to another view controller. There are two methods inside this we have to implement. Number one is the transition duration. Here I will just return the transition duration, which is the property that we have over here. Right? Now the reason why, you may ask, why is it you already have this thing, why we don't just return 0.5 over here? Well, the reason for that is maybe inside other classes, inside your master class, inside the FrontViewController or the ToViewController, you want to set the transition duration. So in that case, you have to make this a property, right? And also doing this way, it will be easier for you to debug this thing, because later on we use that too. Okay, next up, the very main part of our transition, which is our animate transition method. Inside this method, we are going to do all the work that is necessary to animate from that thing to the detail view. Okay, so number one, let's have some of the properties. Number one, we have the duration. Again, the duration, we can use this thing, or we can call the transition duration here. So let's call the transition duration. Okay, let me call this thing transition duration using like this. We're using something we call a transition context. So let's put that transition context here. I will explain in just a moment what that is. And then we get the FrontViewController. So FrontViewController is transition context dot ViewController for the key of from, like this, and I will ungrab this thing. Now you may ask, what is that transition context? Now this transition context it's kind of like a scratch pad, allows you to put in all the animation, all the transition inside this environment. Okay, and this transition context, it has the FrontViewController, it has the ToViewController, it has a container view that allows you to put in all the views inside that view and then animate it. So let's next up, let's have the ToViewController is the transition context ViewController for the key of 2. I will ungrab that too. And then we also have the container view of the transition context container view. Again, this container view is the place where all of your subviews, all of the other views is going to get animated. Okay, next up. Now I know that there's a lot of code. This method gets really long. It's around 30 or 50 lines. So please be patient with me. And also when you download the start project, and there will be a complete project there for you. I will put in a lot of comments there for you too, so that you will make sense of it each step of the way. Okay. So here, after we get the container view, let's make sure we see what is the background view controller and the foreground view controller. The background view controller is the thing behind, the foreground view controller is the thing we see, right? Now the reason why we had to do that is because, as I say before, in this line over here, right, when we animate from number 1 to number 4, then the number 1 is going to be the front view controller, number 4 is the ToView controller. At that time, the ToView controller should be the foreground, should be the thing that we see, and the background should be the background, right? Number 1 should be the background, which is the thing behind that. But when we animate from number 4 back to number 1, then number 4 should be the background and number 1 should be the foreground, so that we can see that thing. It makes sense, right? So let's get back here, and over here we will have var BackgroundViewController is our, just by default, is the FrontViewController, and the ForegroundViewController is our ToViewController. And then we check the operation. If the operation is pop, then we'll reverse that. Pop meaning from number 4 to number 1. So if the operation is pop, then we do BackgroundViewController is the ToViewController, which is number 4 right here, right? It should be in the background. And then the ForegroundViewController should be the FrontViewController. You see that? Okay. Now, let me explain to you what are the steps that does it take to animate stuff to make sure that this animation takes place. So let's say we have the FrontViewController over here, right? We want to animate this this image with the border, the yellow border, right? Into it grows bigger, and it takes the place into the ToViewController, a big full image. Now, just for the sake of our conversation, so that we see stuff easier, not these beautiful images, let's say I call the image, the original image, the small image, to be an orange image, and the big image inside our detail view. Notice that these are two different instances of the UI image view. Okay, two different image, and then inside here we have the original image is our orange image, and the detail image is the purple image. Now, the first step is we have to hide the original image. We have to hide it away. So I hide it away by setting the alpha of that thing to be 0. Okay, we hide that away, or just this. We change the hide or enable property to be false. Okay, now it's still there. That's why I put in it's white, but it still has the border yellow, just to show you that we just hide that away. We do not delete it. We just hide that away. It is still there. Okay, and then number 2, we also hide the final image, the big image view inside our details screen. Step number 3, let's create a duplicate of the original image view. We create a duplicate of the original image view over here. Okay, it's the same thing, but we duplicate that another instance, a different instance, so that in step number 4, when we animate that duplicate to be the full size, it will not affect the original image. Notice that the original image is still over here. It is still, the alpha is still 0, right? So when we animate it to text the full screen, it will be like this. And now when the user see this, it will be full screen. And then we will show the original image again, okay, the big one. And then we will delete and we hide away the duplicate image. When we delete and hide away the duplicate image, the user doesn't know it because it's the same image, but programmatically we delete that duplicate, the instance, so that whatever this appears on here is still there. Okay, makes sense? Now inside, in this project over here, because the detail screen, it is a full screen image, then we do not notice that thing. But imagine if you want to have like, this image is not full screen, it's just over here to the top like this, right? Have a screen. So you also do the same thing. You animate it up, right? So you animate it up and then you delete the duplicate. Make sense? Because now if you animate from using one instance only, it cannot get from one view controller to another view controller. That's a problem. That's why we have to create the duplicate. Make sense? So after we got the duplicate, now the next step is let's get the image view and then we create the duplicate. So maybe this is, okay, maybe this is our background image view. The reason for that is maybe our view controller, the front view controller and the two view controller doesn't return for us the image view. So we have to check if that thing does exist. So we have from the background view controller, we cast it as a zooming view controller, the protocol that we write over here, right? So that is the place where we use this thing, and we use optional chaining here, question mark dot zooming image view, and then for ourselves. Next up, let's have maybe the foreground image view is our foreground view controller. We cast it as our zooming view controller, and then we do zooming image view for ourselves like that. Okay. Next up, we will now here, whenever someone tells us that they are going to implement this method and they don't return for us this image view, then that is the error of the programmer. So if it is the error of the programmer, then we must assert that the program should crash, otherwise the user will have very bad experience. So here I will assert that maybe the background image view, if it is nil, if it is not nil, then it means that it is nil, right? Then we cannot find image view in background VC. Okay, and so let's over here I will have another assert, maybe the foreground image view is not nil, then we cannot find the image view in the foreground VC. Otherwise, the assert here will crash our app if this statement is true, right? Is it? Yeah, if the statement is false. If it is nil, then it false, right? Then it will crash. If it is not nil, then it's true, then it's okay. But now, after that, if we do have the image, then let's have the background image view to be our maybe background image view. We do it like this, and then the foreground image view to be our maybe foreground image view. We ungrab it because now we make sure that we have that thing. Okay, so the next step, after we got the image view, let's create the duplicate that I tell you about. So image view, we'll call that snapshot, the duplicate, to be a UI image view with the image of the background image view.image. Like this. Very simple. Now if you want to duplicate a UI view, there will be a UI view duplicate snapshot method for you to duplicate that. Just Google that. Very simple. I think it's one line of code right there. Okay. Next thing, let's set the content mode for this view to be aspect fill, like this thing, and also the image view snapshot dot layer that masks to bounds to be true, so that it doesn't show the big image, right? We will just shrink it down. All right, now everything is almost set up for all the properties that we have. We have the duration, we have the from view controller, the to view controller, we have the container view, we have the background and the foreground view controller, and we have the image view, we have the duplicate of that image view, right? Now it's time for us to set up the animation. So I will set up the animation like this. We will set the background and the foreground image view to be hidden. Remember I tell you in step number 5 or something, right? So number 1 is we hide the original image view, and number 2 is we hide the big image view. So we have background image view that is hidden to be true, and then the foreground image view that is hidden to be true, right? And then also let's set the foreground view background color. Let's say we want to set that into just the foreground view controller dot view dot background color. Okay, and then we set the foreground view controller dot view dot background color to be our UI color clear, so that we make sure that the foreground, the detail view, it doesn't have the white color. And then we set the container view the background color, because the container view may have a background color. So we set the container view background color to be UIColor.white. Okay. Now, after we set these things, in order to animate stuff, those views must be added to the container view. So we set container view that add subview for our background view controller view, and guess what? We also have to container view that add subview for the foreground view controller view. Right? Now guess what's next? Yeah, the last thing is the snapshot of the image. So container view that add subview image view snapshot, like this. Okay. All right. Next up, we have to check. I know there's a lot. There's already like 40 lines of code. So congratulations, you are working great. Now, next up, let's set the transition state of our transition, because we want to make sure we need that transition state. So that I'm going to share with you a method, very cool method that allows us to set up the initial state of our animation. So here I will set var the pre-transition state to be the transition state, which is the enum, right? Transition state, like this, dot initial. Now this transition state is right here, the enum that we just have. So, and then var the post transition state is going to be the transition state dot final, like this. And then we check if the operation is pop, then it should be reversed. Then the pre-transition is going to be final, and the post-transition is going to be initial. Now the only reason why we need this final and initial is that when we animate stuff inside iOS, if you want to animate things, right, then you must, when you want to animate things, you must set two things. Number one, the initial state of the views that you want to animate. The views you want to animate here is, number one, is the background, the view of the background view controller, right? And number two is the image view. So you have to set the initial state of the background view and the image view. And number two, you need to set the final state of the background view and the image view. So let's create, now when you think about that, that method is going to be two places, right? We are going to write that same method is like two places. So let's factor it out, and I'm going to create a typed alias over here. That is we called zooming views. All the views that we want to animate here is going to be inside this. So let's say we have other views that we want to animate is a UI view. Just for example, inside this project, maybe you want to animate other views. So I want to show you that you can animate other views here. And then we have the image view is a UI view too. Okay, this is a typed alias, a tuple inside script. And then let's create a helper method. This helper method will help us to set the initial alpha, the initial transform of the background view controller view, and then the image view. And also when the state is final, we will set the final state of the background view and also the image view. Make sense? So here we configure the views for the state of transition state with the container view is a UI view, right? And then we have to pass the background view controller is a UI view controller. And then let's say the views in the background is a zooming views, if there's any views in the background. And so the views in the foreground is also a zooming views. How about we have the snapshot views that we want to animate? So the zooming views over here. Now inside this, I know that it is quite a lot of code right here, so let's pause a moment, typing in, and inside this, when we implement it, it will make sense for you. Okay. All right, now inside this, let's switch the state of our transition state over here. Okay, it is just a marker that we create. If the case is initial, then we set the view of the background view here, the alpha to be 1, and then the transform to be like the original transform, right? So BackgroundViewController.view.transform to be CA affine transform dot identity, CA, oops, just 1A affine transform identity, like this. I hope that works. Oh, I'm sorry, CG affine transform identity. So this is of core graphics. Next up, the BackgroundViewController.view.alpha to be 1, the initial state. And then we have the snapshot views. So snapshot views.imageView.frame. We set the frame of that image to be exactly the frame of the views in the background, the image view in the background, right? So when we have this duplicate view, right? Remember when we create the duplicate image? Remember? So we have this original image, right? The original image here, we hide that away. And when we create a duplicate, we want to make sure that we set the frame of this image to be exactly the frame of the original image. Otherwise, if we don't set that, it will be just like around the place and it will be very crappy, right? So we make sure that the frame of this image view, the snapshot, to be the container view that we will convert, let's say we want to convert from the rectangle from our view. So from the rectangle of the views in background.imageView.frame from our views in background.imageView.superView. Okay, so we make sure that that is in place. Next up, for our case of final. Now, if the case is final, if the state is final, then we want to make the background view to shrink down a little bit, and then the image, it will zoom back in, right? So the background, is it final here? All right, case final, like that. So the background view controller.view.transform to be CG affine transform, with the scale X is background scale, which is 0.8 that we set initially, and then Y is background scale, like that. And then we make sure that BackgroundViewController.view.alpha to be 0. That's why it shrink down and then it hides away. And then we do snapshot views.imageView.frame to be container view.convert from the views in foreground.imageView.frame from our views in foreground.imageView.superView, like this. Oops, superview, just like that, right? Now I know this can be a little bit tricky, so spend a moment to read that again. Maybe pause the video a little bit because we are going to be done here. Okay, we are going to very close here. All right, now let's go back into our animate transition over here. The animate transition, after we got the operation, is we set the operation for the pre-transition state and the post-transition state, right? Now let's configure our views. So we use the method that we just create, configure the views for the pre-transition state, because again, this is the pre-transition state before our animate. For the container view, background view controller is background view controller. The views in the background is a tuple, so for the tuple of background image view and background image view, just like that, right? And then the views in the foreground, let's say foreground image view and foreground image view. Now again, if you want to use animate other method, animate other views, then you can replace these two instances. Okay, maybe like a background view, a background color view, or another maybe fancy stuff, right? I don't know. It depends on the project that you're working on. For the snapshot view is just the snapshot of the image view. So snapshot, oops, image view, snapshot, and image view, snapshot, like this, right? And then now this step is very, very important, because during our transition or before the transition, before the animation, maybe the user rotate the device, so the views will be not properly laid out. So we want to make sure that the foreground view controller, right, the view is laid out properly. So laid out if needed, just like this. And then finally, we use the UIView.animate method. Okay, so let's UIViewAnimate with duration, delete, option. No, not this thing. Animate and spring damping, like that. Okay, duration, we use the duration, delay 0, spring damping, let's say it is 1.0, initial velocity, let's say it is 0. The option here, let's have just an empty set. We don't need the option. The animation is what we set the final state, the post state of our transition. So guess what? Yeah, we already write the code for this thing. So I'm going to paste this configure views like this. Okay, now that is quite a lot of code right here. So we have the configure views like this thing for the post transition state. Container view, background view controller, all of those good stuff. And then the completion. This is important because we have to make sure that this thing is finished. Now after it finished like this, we should make back the background view controller.view.transform to be CG affine transform.identity. So we set everything back, right? When we goes into the final state, the animation is done, we should make everything come back to life, which is our step number 6 over here. Remember, step number 6, hide and delete the duplicate image. Remember that? All right. So we hide that thing and we delete the image view snapshot dot remove from super view. Okay, and then we go back the background image view dot is hidden. Oops, is hidden to be false, and then the foreground image view dot is hidden. Oops, is hidden. Oops, is hidden. Foreground. Oops, foreground image view that is hidden to be false too. Okay, and then we also need to set the foreground view controller dot view dot background color to be foreground view background color, like that. We store that over here. Foreground background view color, like that. Okay, and then next up, we have to tell the transition context that we just complete our transition. So complete transition, not transition context, that transition was cancelled. Boom, there we go, my friend. That is your UI Zoom transitioning delegate in place. So let's run the project and hope that it works. So, oops, we have a, this should be self.view configure views, right? So I know there's quite a lot of code, so let's just hope that it works. Now, a lot of you, maybe you're watching this, you already know that it would not work because we haven't done anything yet because we just create a complete zoom transition delegate, but we never actually have that in play, right? We never put that into work. So the only way that we can do that is very simple. It's incredibly simple. Number one, we have to very simple. We just have to search for an object method here. An object here inside your storyboard, and then look at the navigation controller. You see this navigation controller. You just drag this object, a generic object, into this thing. It is below the first responder, and then we set the custom class for that object to be for our zoom transitioning delegate, and then we will set the delegate of the navigation controller over here. Right click, you will see there's an outlet over here for the delegate. We set that to be the zoom transitioning delegate. Now why? It's because we implement that below here. Right? Remember this thing, UINavigationControllerDelegate. Pretty cool, huh? Now let's run the project and see how it looks like. Guys, running over here, I think. Let's run it. It's still not work. Let's run it once again and see what's going on here. Why is it not work? Let's run that. Still not work. So let's debug this thing together. Okay. Now we make sure we did have this navigation controller delegate implemented. So let's have a breakpoint over here. Line number 126. Run the project once again. And let's see how it looks like. Okay, when we click into this thing, surely it breaks from here. It means that it does override this thing. It does conform to the UINavigationControllerDelegate. Now let's jump ahead. When I click into this thing, it jumps next, right? We step over this thing. We jump into this, but it doesn't go into this. We want to override, we return ourselves to be the transition object, but return nil. Why is that? Well, the only way is that this thing is false. It means that the FrontViewController and the ToViewController is not conforming to our zooming view controller. Now this zooming view controller is the protocol that we implement. It requires any FrontViewController and the ToViewController have to implement that in order for us, the class, the zoom transition, has the image view. Remember that? Yeah. Now the final state. Yeah, that is a intentional breakpoint right there. So let's delete that breakpoint inside your Photos Collection View Controller right here. I'm going to insert several things. Number one is a selected index path. If you know about collection view, it has an index path, right? Index path of any cell. So we store the selected index path, and then inside your UI view collection view delegate like this, whenever we select an image, an item, then we do self.selected index path to be the index path. We store that thing, right? Just like that. And then now guess what? We have to implement that protocol. So extension for the Photos Collection View Controller, we conform to the zooming view controller, right? Here we have the zooming background view. We return nil because we don't want to have any background view. And then we have the zooming image view. Here I will return what we check. If let, we do got the index path. Index path is the selected index path. Then we got let the cell to be collection view dot cell for item at index path like this, right? We cast it as a photo cell, which is the custom class of our photo. Very simple class. And then we just return cell.image view like this, right? Otherwise we would return nil. Now when we return nil, the app will crash because that is our error, right? So value has no, let's see what this is. Oh, photo image view, sorry. So photo image view like that, right? Pretty good, huh? Now, the last thing is the detail view controller. So the detail view controller, hey, can I challenge you a little bit? Implement the zooming view controller protocol for this detail view controller. So pause this video, implement the zooming view controller protocol for this detail view controller. Come back with me. Okay, did you do that? Here we go. Let's do this thing. Extension for the detail view controller. Zooming view controller, here we have the background, we return nil, right? If we got the zooming image view, we return our category image view over here. I think this is a wrong name, but that's okay. Okay, you see that? Okay, now run the project, and this time I am pretty sure that it will work. Now let's hope for the best. Here we go. Click here. Boom. Very beautiful. You see this? Alright my friend, that is how you create the zooming image transition in iOS. I hope that you enjoyed this video and you love this kind of training. Then I think you will really love what I have for you in just a couple of days. That is, I have a new introduction video series for my new program called Socialize Your Apps 2017. This is the program where I teach people how to build 5 different social network apps using Firebase, using Swift and Xcode, all of that good stuff. So in just a couple of days, if you love to get this video training series all for free, then go to this page. Go to the page on this, click the link on this page, I guess. Download that thing, enter your name and email so I can send you 3 awesome training video series on number 1, building Twitter with Firebase. Yeah, the social network app. Number 2, Instagram user interface. So we'll build the user interface for Instagram, and then we'll build the user interface for the last video for Nike retail store. I hope that you enjoyed that series and also join me in that series. So all you have to do is click the button on this page, get into the series. I see you inside, and also go out there every single day of your life, learn new things, craft your ideas, and contribute to the world. I see you.